Imagine walking into a bank, converting your entire life savings into pristine, crisp sheets of paper, and then watching a government decree make those sheets completely worthless by morning. Now imagine that this disaster wasn't caused by a war or an invading army, but by a single man. A fugitive murderer, a professional gambler, and a mathematical genius who single-handedly convinced an entire empire to hand over their gold and silver in exchange for printed slips of paper. This is the story of John Law. In the early 1700s, he conducted a radical economic experiment that completely transformed the global financial system. He didn't just invent modern paper currency, he engineered a speculative mania so massive that it brought the Kingdom of France to its knees. It was the birth of the Mississippi Bubble, the moment humanity realized that money is nothing more than a shared illusion. But if you think this is just a dusty history lesson, you're missing the bigger picture. The exact same psychological traps and structural flaws that broke France in 1720 are secretly running our world today. There is a hidden playbook used by the ultra-wealthy, from the ancient emperors of West Africa to modern tech billionaires. It's a playbook built on a simple, counterintuitive truth. The rich never keep their money in the bank. To understand why, we have to look at what happens when a society forgets what wealth actually is, and what happens when the illusion finally shatters. The beginning. Our story begins in the dark, rain-slick streets of London in 1694. A handsome, meticulously dressed Scotsman named John Law stands in Bloomsbury Square. Facing him is Edward Wilson, a notorious dandy. A duel has been called over the affections of a lady. Swords are drawn. In a flash of steel, Law plunges his blade directly into Wilson's chest, killing him instantly. Law is arrested, convicted of murder, and sentenced to hang. But a man with his mathematical mind doesn't simply accept fate. He stages a daring prison break, scales the prison walls, and flees across the English Channel to continental Europe. For the next 2 decades, Law lives on the run as an elite wanderer, moving through the opulent casinos and salons of Amsterdam, Venice, and Paris. He isn't just playing games, he is studying human behavior, probability, and the flow of capital. He observes a fundamental flaw in the European economy, a devastating shortage of precious metals. In the early 18th century, money was strictly hard currency, gold and silver coins. If a kingdom ran out of these metals, its economy choked. Trade stalled, businesses collapsed, and governments couldn't pay their debts. No nation felt this stranglehold more than France. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, had just died, leaving behind a country that was completely broke. Decades of lavish wars and the absurd construction costs of the Palace of Versailles had left France with a staggering debt of over 2 billion livres. The country was drowning, unable to even mint enough coins to keep daily commerce alive. The people were desperate, the regency was panicked, and the economy was completely frozen. France was a financial corpse waiting for a miracle, and John Law was waiting in the wings to provide it. In 1715, Law steps into the court of the newly appointed regent of France, the Duke of Orleans. Law carries a proposal so radical it sounds like dark magic to the aristocracy. His thesis is simple yet revolutionary. Money shouldn't be limited by how much gold you can dig out of the ground. Money is merely a medium of exchange. It is an engine for economic activity. Law argues that if France replaces its heavy gold and silver coins with paper banknotes backed by the state, the economy will instantly unlock. The speed of transactions will skyrocket, credit will become readily available, and the nation's crushing debt will melt away. Desperate for any lifeline, the regent grants Law permission to open a private bank in 1716, the Banque Générale. Law's bank begins issuing paper notes. To build trust, he guarantees that these notes can be exchanged for an exact weight of silver coins at any time. The experiment is an overnight sensation. For the first time in years, French commerce surges. The economy wakes up like a giant injected with adrenaline. But Law is far from finished. He realizes that paper money is just the fuel. He still needs an asset engine to drive the entire system. In 1717, Law acquires the Compagnie d'Occident, the West Company, and secures a total commercial monopoly over the vast French territories in North America, a mysterious, uncharted land known as the Mississippi River Basin. He merges his bank and his trading company into one mega-entity, rebranded as the Company of the Indies, though history remembers it simply as the Mississippi Company. Law tells the public a mesmerizing story. The wilds of Louisiana are overflowing with mountains of gold, emeralds, and untapped riches just waiting to be harvested. To fund the expeditions to gather this wealth, the company begins issuing public shares of stock. This is the exact moment where brilliant economics transforms into a runaway train of mass psychology. Law offers an ingenious deal to the French public. People can buy shares in his Mississippi company using their government debt bonds or his bank's paper notes. Suddenly, the worthless, stagnant government IOUs that citizens had been holding onto for years can be converted into shares of a company that promises unlimited wealth. The demand is explosive. Everyone wants a piece of Louisiana. To keep the momentum going, Law manipulates the levers of power with terrifying precision. He systematically buys up other monopolies. Soon, his company controls the French tobacco trade, the slave trade, the national mint, and the collection of all French taxes. John Law is no longer just a banker. He is the undisputed economic dictator of France. He is officially appointed as the Controller General of Finances. To maximize excitement, Law orchestrates a masterclass in marketing and artificial scarcity. He issues shares in carefully timed waves, or tranches. The first batch of shares is sold at 500 livres each. As rumors of massive gold discovery spread, he releases a second batch at 5,000 livres. Before long, old shares are trading in the streets for 10,000 livres, a staggering 2,000% return in a matter of months. The narrow street outside Law's Parisian headquarters, the Rue de Quincampoix, becomes the financial epicenter of the Western world. It is packed wall-to-wall with thousands of people from every social class. Dukes, servants, countesses, and shoemakers rub shoulders in the mud, screaming out buy and sell orders. The chaos is so intense that a hunchback living on the street reportedly makes a small fortune simply by renting out his back as a makeshift writing desk for stockbrokers. The sheer speed of the wealth creation gives birth to a brand new word in the human language: millionaire. The wealth mechanics. To understand how this house of cards stayed up, we have to look at the underlying wealth mechanics. This wasn't a standard business model. It was an intricate, circular feedback loop powered entirely by leverage and liquidity. John Law's loop. Plus. Bank prints paper money. Public uses paper to buy shares. Stock prices skyrocket. Bank prints more paper to lend to investors. Here is exactly how money flowed through John Law's financial engine. Debt conversion. The French government owed massive sums of gold to its citizens. Law took that debt, brought it onto the balance sheet of his private company, and handed the citizens stock certificates instead. He successfully converted high-risk government debt into speculative corporate equity. The printed leverage. As the public hungered for more shares, they needed more money to buy them. Law's bank solved this by printing massive waves of paper banknotes. He then lent these freshly printed notes directly to investors, who immediately used them to buy more shares of his company. The illusion of value. The printed money drove up the stock price. The rising stock price made the public feel wealthier. This perceived wealth made them spend more money in the real economy, which temporarily caused a massive boom in French manufacturing and trade. The critical flaw in Law's machine was that the entire system rested on an assumption that the Mississippi Territory would eventually generate real, tangible profits to justify the soaring stock price. But in reality, Louisiana was a swampy, malaria-ridden wilderness. There were no mountains of gold. The company was spending fortunes just to ship vagrants, criminals, and German peasants across the Atlantic to colonize the territory. The stock price was skyrocketing based purely on future expectations, while the volume of paper money circulating in France was expanding at an unsustainable rate. Law was actively diluting the currency to support a fiction. By early 1720, the Mississippi bubble reaches its terrifying apex. The valuation of the Mississippi Company climbs to over 6 billion livres. To put that into perspective, the company was theoretically worth more than the total combined value of all the physical land, houses, and property in France. John Law is now wealthier than any modern billionaire. Foreign rulers send ambassadors just to beg him for an audience. He buys up 14 massive rural estates in France, along with dozens of grand palaces in Paris. But beneath the glittering surface, the real world is starting to push back. Because Law's bank has flooded the country with paper banknotes, an invisible monster awakens: inflation. The price of basic goods begins to climb out of control. The cost of bread, meat, and clothing doubles, then triples. The working class, who don't own shares of stock, find themselves starving in a country that is supposedly richer than it has ever been. The first cracks in the system appear when a few highly sophisticated investors look at the mountains of paper notes in their hands and decide it's time to take their chips off the table. They realize that while paper is convenient for trading, it holds no intrinsic value. In January 1720, the Prince of Conti walks into Law's bank with 3 massive wagons. He dumps a mountain of paper banknotes on the counter and demands they be converted into physical gold and silver coins, exactly as Law had originally promised. He fills his wagons with raw precious metals and drives away. A wave of panic ripples through the elite. Other wealthy aristocrats quietly begin following the prince's lead. They discreetly pack their gold into carriages and ship it across the borders into Switzerland and England. They are liquidating their paper illusions and converting them into hard, undilutable global assets. The panic quickly escalates into a full-scale rout. Law tries everything to stop the bleeding. He uses the power of the state to declare that gold and silver are no longer legal tender for large payments. He outlaws the possession of more than 500 levers in precious metal coins, sending police to search citizens' homes. But his heavy-handed tactics only confirm everyone's worst fear: the bank is out of money. By May 1720, Law is forced to admit the truth. He announces that the value of the paper banknotes and the Mississippi stock shares will be systematically cut in half. The announcement breaks the spell instantly. The shared illusion evaporates. The Rue de Quincampoix transforms from a den of speculative dreams into a scene of absolute horror. Huge, angry mobs storm the bank, desperate to exchange their paper for anything of real value. In the crush, dozens of people are trampled to death. People stand outside the locked doors of the bank, holding millions of levers in paper notes, realizing they can't even use them to buy a single loaf of bread. 1719. The dream. 1720. The reality. Mississippi Company. Stock price, 10,000 L. Stock price, 500 L. We are all millionaires, it's just paper. John Law's meteoric rise ends in total ruin. He is stripped of his offices, placed under house arrest, and eventually smuggled out of France in the dead of night to save him from being torn apart by the public. He spends the rest of his days dying in poverty in Venice, gambling for pocket change. France's economy is utterly shattered. The French population develops a deep, multi-generational distrust of banks, stocks, and paper currency that lasts for more than a century, leaving them economically vulnerable as Britain speeds ahead with its own financial innovations. Yet, Law's experiment changed world history forever. He proved that an entire global economy could be run on faith and fiat currency, money backed solely by government decree. Today, every major economy on Earth operates on the exact system John Law designed. Your wallet is filled with paper notes, and your bank account displays digital numbers that are backed by nothing but trust in a government. The ultra-wealthy understand this history inside and out. They know that cash is an illusion, banks are fragile custody systems, and mass psychology drives the value of everything. To bridge the gap between 18th century France and the modern world, look no further than the legendary king of Mali, Mansa Musa. Centuries before John Law printed his first note, Mansa Musa embarked on his famous 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca. He traveled with a caravan of 60,000 men and tens of thousands of pounds of pure gold. He didn't keep his wealth stored away in a central vault. He brought it out into the world. He spent and handed out gold so aggressively in cities like Cairo and Medina that he single-handedly hyperinflated the local economies. The value of gold plummeted across the Middle East, and it took over a decade for those regions to financially recover. Mansa Musa accidentally proved the exact same law of physics that John Law discovered by design. An oversupply of any currency destroys its purchasing power. Here are the 8 fundamental laws of wealth preservation that the rich use to survive these shifting tides. Cash is an energy currency, not a storage vault. The wealthy never view money as an asset to be hoarded in a bank account. They view cash as economic energy. If it sits still, it slowly decays due to inflation. Money must always be in motion, flowing directly into productive, income-generating assets. 2. Own the underlying infrastructure. John Law became wealthy because he owned the bank, the tax collection system, and the trade routes. The rich do not just buy products, they buy monopolies, utilities, platforms, and essential infrastructure that society is forced to use every single day. 3. Distinguish between liquidity and wealth. Paper currency and digital bank balances represent liquidity, the ability to buy things quickly. True wealth, however, is found in scarce, hard assets that cannot be printed out of thin air: real estate, businesses, energy supplies, intellectual property, and rare commodities. 4. Watch the smart money transact. When the Prince of Conti began quietly trading his paper back into physical gold wagons, the smart money was making its exit. Pay close attention to where corporate insiders, institutional funds, and sovereign wealth engines are moving their capital during a market boom. V. Avoid falling in love with the narrative. The public lost everything in the Mississippi bubble because they bought into a beautiful story about Louisiana gold that had zero data to back it up. Never invest your hard-earned money based on hype, social media trends, or exciting narratives. Look strictly at cash flows, balance sheets, and real-world utility. 6. Leverage is a powerful servant but a terminating master. Law built his empire using massive debt and financial leverage. It worked flawlessly on the way up, compounding his gains, but it crushed him instantly on the way down. Never over-leverage yourself on speculative investments. When the tide turns, debt can wipe you out overnight. 7. Understand the psychology of the crowd. Human psychology hasn't changed since the packed crowds on the Rue de Quincampoix in 1719. Markets will always swing wildly between two basic emotions: extreme greed and blinding fear. The investors who build generational wealth are those who remain completely detached, buying when the crowd is terrified and selling when the crowd is euphoric. 8. Diversify across jurisdictions. The wealthy individuals who survived the crash of 1720 were those who had quietly moved a portion of their assets out of France and into foreign economies like London or Venice. True financial security requires global diversification. Never keep all of your wealth tied to a single currency, a single asset class, or a single government's regulatory control. The next time you look at your bank account, remember the ghost of John Law. The numbers on your screen are not wealth. They are simply tokens in a massive game of musical chairs. The ultra-wealthy understand that the game is fine for daily life, but when the music stops, you want to be standing on solid ground, holding real assets that the world actually needs. Don't let yourself get caught holding nothing but paper.